The knock came when the afternoon felt too quiet, the kind of silence that presses on the ears and makes old thoughts louder. Margaret Hale lay awake in bed, staring at the pale ceiling, knowing she should get up but not having the strength to do it. Since her husband's death, days blurred together. Morning coffee turned into afternoon naps, and afternoons stretched into long, empty evenings. She hadn't planned to stay in bed that day, but grief did not ask for permission. Then, the knock came again, soft, careful, almost unsure. Margaret turned her head toward the bedroom door, her heart beating a little faster. No one ever came by unannounced anymore. Her daughter used to, years ago, back when life felt normal. Margaret cleared her throat and listened. A familiar voice followed Margaret. "It's Daniel," her breath caught. Daniel Foster, her son-in-law, or maybe former son-in-law, depending on how people chose to describe things these days. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not in the middle of the day. "I'm in the bedroom," she called, pushing herself upright against the pillows. The door's open. Footsteps moved down the hall, slow and respectful. Daniel appeared in the doorway and stopped, as if he didn't want to cross an invisible line. He looked different than she remembered. Thinner, maybe. His shoulders seemed heavier, like he was carrying something he couldn't put down. His hair was slightly uncombed, his face tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said. "You're not," Margaret replied. Her voice was calm, though her chest felt tight. "Come in." He stepped inside and pulled a chair closer, sitting carefully, leaving space between them. The sunlight from the window fell across the room, lighting the dust in the air. Everything felt still, like the moment before a storm. "I didn't know where else to go," Daniel said. "I almost turned around twice." Margaret studied him. She had known him for over a decade. She remembered the first time Emily brought him home, nervous and hopeful. She remembered how he'd shaken her husband's hand firmly, how he'd always said please and thank you. Daniel had never raised his voice, never disrespected anyone. He had been steady, reliable, safe. "You look like you haven't been sleeping," she said. He gave a weak smile, that obvious. "Yes," she answered gently. "Talk to me." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Emily and I aren't doing well." "I think you already know that." Margaret nodded slowly. "I suspected it's more than just space now," he said. "We've reached a point where silence feels heavier than arguments. And when that happens, something is already broken." Margaret felt a familiar ache. She loved her daughter. She loved Daniel too, in a different way. Hearing this hurt more than she expected. "I'm sorry," she said. "So am I, Daniel." Replied. He paused, then added, "But that's not why I came." The words settled in the room like a warning. Margaret shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket. "Then why are you here, Daniel?" He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not panic, but something deeper. The fear of being honest. "There's something I've needed to say for a long time," he said. "And if I don't say it now, I don't think I ever will." Margaret's heart began to race. "You're making me nervous." "I know," he said quickly. "But please, just listen. I'm not here to cause trouble. Not asking for anything." He took a deep breath. "You've always treated me with kindness, even when I didn't deserve it. You listened to me. You saw me as more than just Emily's husband, and over the years, that meant more to me than I realized." Margaret's fingers curled slightly into the blanket. "At first I told myself it was nothing," Daniel continued. "That I was just grateful, that I admired you. But feelings don't always stay in the boxes we put them in." The room felt warmer. Or maybe that was just Margaret's pulse. Pounding in her ears, "I fought it," he said. "I buried it under responsibility and routine. I focused on being a good husband, a good man. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was lying to myself." Margaret's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Daniel, I know how this sounds," he said, straightening quickly. And I hate myself for even thinking it. But I needed you to hear the truth from me, not from silence. She searched his face, looking for anything careless or selfish. She found none, only sincerity and pain. You mattered to me, Daniel said, in a way I never expected, in a way that scared me. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Memories rushed in quiet talks in the kitchen. Shared laughter at family dinners. The way Daniel always asked how she was really doing. She had never questioned those moments. Not until now. I'm not asking you to feel the same, Daniel. Added quickly. I would never cross that line. I just couldn't keep carrying this alone. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. Life went on, unaware that something fragile had just been spoken. Margaret took a slow breath. Why tell me now? 'Cause everything else is falling apart, Daniel said honestly. And when things break, you stop pretending. I didn't want this truth to turn into regret. She looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man standing at the edge of change, brave enough to speak but careful enough to respect boundaries. You came while I was in bed, Margaret said softly. Why? Daniel hesitated. Because this house feels honest. 'Cause you don't pretend. And because I needed to face you without distractions. Without masks. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. Her life had been defined by duty for so long. Wife, mother, caretaker. No one had spoken to her like this in years. Not as someone important, not as someone seen. It's a lot. She said, I know, Daniel replied. And if you tell me to leave, I will. If you want distance, I'll give it. I just needed you to know who I am, fully. She opened her eyes again. You've put me in a difficult position. I'm sorry, he said immediately. That was never my intention. Silence filled the space between them, heavy but not hostile. Margaret felt emotions rise that she hadn't felt in a long time: confusion, sadness, and something dangerously close to warmth. I need time, she said at last. It's time to understand what you're saying. Time to think. Daniel nodded. That's fair. He stood slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might break the moment. At the door, he turned back. Thank you for listening. No matter what happens next, I won't forget that. When he left, the house felt changed. Not louder, not quieter, just different. Margaret lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling once more, her heart still racing. Some words could never be taken back. Some truths reshaped everything they touched. And as the afternoon light faded, Margaret knew this was only the beginning. The night after Daniel left, Margaret did not sleep. The house creaked the way it always did, but every sound felt sharper, closer. His words replayed in her mind, not as something dangerous, but as something honest that refused to fade. By morning, she knew one thing: clearly silence would only make things worse. 3 days passed before she saw him again. It happened at the grocery store, late afternoon, the hour when people moved slower and spoke softer. Margaret was reaching for a loaf of bread when she noticed him at the end of the aisle. Daniel stood there holding a basket he barely used, staring at nothing. He looked up, surprised, and for a moment neither of them moved. Margaret, he said quietly. Daniel. They stood between shelves of ordinary things while something heavy waited between them. She could have turned away. She didn't. Walk with me, she said. They paid for their items and stepped outside. The parking lot was warm. The sky, wide and pale blue. They walked without direction at first, just side by side. I've been thinking, Margaret said, about what you told me. Daniel nodded. I figured you would. I won't pretend it didn't affect me, she continued. It did. But this situation is layered. There are people involved. History, I know, he said. I don't want to hurt anyone, especially Emily. Margaret stopped walking and faced him. Have you told her? No, Daniel answered quickly, and I don't plan to. This isn't something she needs to carry. She studied his face, searching for selfishness. She didn't find it. That matters. She said. They resumed walking. The tension eased slightly, replaced by something calmer, more thoughtful. Over the next few weeks, their lives crossed carefully. Short conversations, public places, boundaries clearly held. Margaret noticed small things, how Daniel never lingered too close, how he always let her set the tone. Trust grew not through words, but restraint. One afternoon, Margaret invited him over for coffee. Not to her bedroom this time, to the kitchen. The sunlight streamed through the window, familiar and safe. You didn't have to invite me, Daniel said. I wanted to, she replied. Honesty deserves clarity. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them. I won't lie, Margaret said. Your words woke something in me. It's not attraction the way people might imagine, but awareness. I remembered that I'm still a person, not just someone's mother, not just someone's past. Daniel listened closely. That wasn't my intention, but I'm glad if it reminded you of that. It did, she said. But I also know this can't move forward the way emotions sometimes want. I agree, he said. This ever becomes something, it has to be clean. Respectful or not at all. Time passed again. Emily officially moved out of state. For work, the separation became final, quiet, without drama. Margaret supported her daughter from a distance, careful with words, careful with truth. Some things didn't need to be shared. Months later, Margaret and Daniel met for dinner at a small restaurant by the river. People talked and laughed around them. Life felt normal again. I'm not the same woman I was before, Margaret said, looking out at the water. And you're not the same man. Daniel smiled softly. No, I think we both grew. They didn't touch, they didn't rush. What grew between them was slow, built on shared understanding and careful steps. Not romance driven by impulse, but connection shaped by loss and honesty. One evening, as the sun set low and the river reflected orange light, Daniel finally said, if this path ever feels wrong, tell me. I will step back. Margaret nodded. And if it feels right, we walk slowly. That was their agreement. Years later, when people asked how their story began, Margaret never mentioned the bed or the knock or the fear. She said it started with truth spoken gently and two people brave enough to handle it with care. Because some stories are not about shock. They're about choosing respect when emotion runs deep. And choosing honesty even when it changes everything.